Coming to you straight from the Rio Grande and beyond. Broadcasting to the four corners of the globe. So grab your seat, your coffee, or your sundowner.
Okay, everybody, here we go.
On point, as always. This is Gloves Off. Gloves Off.
Wherever you call home, we are there. In favorite places. Large spaces. For many homes, we have coverage that fits the way you live. And with our home systems protection, you can cover major home appliances and more. We cover more type of homes than ever. Get the coverage you and your family deserves. For a free no obligation quote, visit us online or simply give us a call.
Back at you and Gloves Off, and today I have a great guest, a great activist, a mom that is fighting for children's rights in the state of Texas. And her name is Sheena Rodriguez, and she has Alliance for a Safe Texas. How are we doing today?
I'm doing great. Always great to be with you. How are you doing?
Good. Enjoying South Texas, Laredo. I don't know how hot it is up there in the DFW area, but it's hot here.
Yeah, today it's actually we had a little bit of a cooler front today, so it's been a nice light breeze, but we've had a number of back-to-back pretty intense storms up here, and unfortunately driving back and forth to Austin from my area, I've gotten caught up in a number of those storms, but praise God. Made it every single time. But yeah, such is spring in North Texas, I suppose. So
No, here it's over 100, and it's going to stay that way till probably mid-October. So it's just the way it is down here in South Texas. You go outside and in 5 minutes you're already medium rare, so doesn't matter what you do. But anyway, I've seen your work and for many years now. And you've been a fighter for this great cause, and the cause is that there's a lot of child trafficking going on, and you've been standing up with that banner. And I want you to explain a little bit how you got involved, the numbers, that history for our viewers, for them to understand that this is actually it's not something Hollywood made up. This is something that's going on every day.
Yeah. So really, my background, the core of my heart and my activism has always been. I've always been a major pro-life activist. For several years, I was volunteer counselor at a local pregnancy center here when my kids were younger, and so that's really where I started to get introduced, if you will, to different forms of what I would say is forms of trafficking, particularly in when it comes to forced arranged marriages, because I had clients, that came in very abusive situations, particularly from Middle Eastern countries, that were brought over as brides, and this was years ago, and so I remember then that situation really opening my eyes. And then fast forward, to really when we started seeing the large number of unaccompanied minors coming over the border, which are those children that come from different countries that arrive at our country's border without any parent or guardian, and started seeing that really especially under the Obama administration, right? And that's when Governor Perry was also governor of Texas, and even he started saying, where are all these kids coming from? Because prior to that, yeah, we had some unaccompanied minors arrive, but it was on such a smaller scale that they really didn't even keep track of and quantify and publish those numbers. And of course, and a lot of that had to deal with was a result of interpretations of court cases, Flora settlement, and several other, court cases, subsequent court cases from there, that really caused and it motivated and incentivized more children to be used as a workaround in our immigration here in the country, in our immigration laws. And so then we started seeing more and more of these kids coming over. Of course, it happened under Obama and then the first Trump administration, if you remember back in 2016. Um, and then it continued and exploded in even more unprecedented numbers under the previous administration, the Biden administration, in which, of course, all of which we, Texas, were at the forefront because of where we are geographically, right? And so, especially in the RGV area, the Rio Grande Valley area and sector, I had gone down there to go see for myself because I didn't trust what the media was saying. And I felt very strongly a calling to go and see for myself what was going on. So that's what I started doing. I started visiting all over our Texas border, across all 4 out of the 5 sectors, all except for the Big Bend sector. I didn't really spend much time there because there's not nearly as many people coming over, and started seeing for myself and documenting what was going on. And then that led me to then eventually, with all my research and documentation, being asked to go and testify twice to Congress over the last few years about what I had witnessed and documented with regards to the children. Testified alongside other whistleblowers within HHS, Health and Human Services, and ORR, the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and the facilities and the NGOs and all of that encompasses, which I know we'll get into a little bit more here in a little bit. And then really continued that advocacy, especially on the state and local level. So I had done a lot of research with these NGOs, with these facilities, with a lot of the longstanding issues regarding them, and really decided, well, what? It's not enough to just know what the problem is, right? And to know what is happening, because these children, we know, are oftentimes going into the hands of their abusers. They are, in fact, being trafficked, labor trafficking, sex trafficking, because they're easy to exploit, right? A lot of these children, and I witnessed and documented and testified to this, a lot of these children just simply don't exist. They come over here, they claim to be somebody. Oftentimes, many of them don't even have documentation whatsoever, or they could even be falsified documentation. And then they tell people, they tell the agencies, like, oh, this is supposed to be my sponsor. This is who they said my sponsor is going to be. There's a lot of issues with the vetting of the sponsors. And then we, on our tax dollars, oftentimes these children end up being delivered into their hands of the traffickers using our tax dollars. And then in between, with regards to these facilities, these NGO or non-governmental organization facilities, some of them are for profit, some of them are not for profit. They're all over Texas. We have more facilities operating in Texas, and have had more for quite some time, than any other state. There's 27 states that have these facilities operating. We're number 1, with over 50 last documented that are operational, and many of them that are continuing to operate, including right now as we speak. And so it's just been an ongoing issue, and while they're in those facilities too, oftentimes they end up getting even further abused and exploited. Many of them, end up getting raped, like what happened with one large NGO here in Texas, where even a 5-year-old, an 8-year-old, and 11-year-old was all raped in allegedly by the DOJ, an facility in El Paso. And so trying to then figure out a solution. What can we do to try and help? This is a very complex and massive issue, especially when you're looking at it from the state, what we can do from the state level, right? Because these are federally regulated facilities. But then looking to see what can we do, and that's what we've also been championing for two sessions now, and I believe it was 2 or 3 special sessions last legislative session in Texas, and we're finally making headway. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit more too. So that's not very brief, I know, but it's been a very long road, and very very emotionally taxing.
I know that you're hard at work. I know that you came down here to Webb County in Laredo, and we went out and we looked at many things that you were telling me exactly what they were. And it's horrific that it's right in front of us. We don't know that it's happening. It's right in front of us. And we need to be a little bit more vigilant. I think the abuse and all that, it's horrific. All the stories that you've told me and you've explained, and it's just something that's horrific that we have going on in this society. And people always talk about freedoms, but we have slavery here. That's slavery, and people do not understand that. And you have a bill that's about to pass or just passed. To explain that bill a little bit to us as well.
Yeah. So, and just to give a little bit more data, what you were just talking about too, and even just with the unaccompanied minors, really quick before we go into the legislation, Texas, and I've written extensively about this. Texas has had since 2015 over 900,000 of these unaccompanied minors that were released to sponsors residing throughout the state. Almost every single county has been impacted. Almost in nearly every single zip code. I had been spending years breaking that data down by county and by zip code with information that was released by the New York Times. And so this is really everywhere and all over Texas, especially when you look at the percentages of how many of these children they still haven't been able to locate. And it's really concerning, especially when so many American children, as it is, particularly in our foster care system, is already taxed, already abused, and ends up in these similar cycles of trafficking and abuse. And oftentimes, the majority of these children, too, even in the foster care, are minority children, right? Like from our community, the Hispanic community, from the Black community. And so easy to prey on, and it's really disturbing. And so when you have massive numbers like that, like 900,000, and a good percentage of that 900,000 that go missing or themselves end up in these trafficking situations, or even in what we also see the foster care system as well, that even further hinders and stretches those finite resources for our law enforcement, for those agencies that are those anti-trafficking agencies that are doing boots on the ground hard work, trying to find these children, rehabilitate them, and bring them out of this bondage situation. So, these issues of abuse and exploitation and trafficking happens to everyone. It doesn't matter, rich, poor, white, black, brown. It doesn't matter. It knows no boundaries. But then when you funnel into this already massive existing problem, even more additional vulnerable children that are even easier, I would argue, in many ways to exploit, because they, like I said, many of them just don't exist. You're really feeding the beast, if you will, of exploitation, and these are the most vulnerable populations. So that's why this is so important to me, because it is, to me, an extension of the pro-life issue. I'm pro-life from conception to death, and everything in between. And so that's why we need to fight for these children and fight for what's right. It's our obligation. But then going into the bill, if we can, HB 3120, House Bill 3120 by Representative Stan Kitzman. And then it was sponsored by Senator Joan Huffman. We did make it across the finish line. We got voted out nearly unanimously, all but two Republicans. Every Democrat, all but two Republicans voted for it in the House. And then it voted out unanimously in the Texas Senate, and is now on its way to the governor's office. And it is dealing with what we can do legally and constitutionally from the state level regarding these NGO facilities, expanding the regulations, stating that if you are going to operate here, because we cannot stop these facilities from operating since they are federal, but we can set those guidelines by which they, just like any other business, just like your business owner, right? There's those guidelines that you have to adhere to, like any other business, and common sense things like reporting, reporting very crucial things like occupancy, communicable diseases, things of that nature. But then also communicating and entering into agreements with the local community, which was so vital, especially in rural and more or less populated areas in Texas, to make sure that they're not a hindrance to local law enforcement agencies, and the EMS services, the emergency services there. But then one of the even more important things is requiring background checks for the employees and the volunteers with access to these vulnerable children because, and in one case, and this has been happening across the spectrum, for profit, not for profit, but Southwest Key program, which is one of the largest that is based here in Texas. They're actually based in Austin. The DOJ had, at the tail end of the Biden administration, had actually filed a lawsuit against the Southwest Key program because of the longstanding allegations of abuse that had gone on since, I believe they cited 2015, 2016 through 2023, where employees were allegedly, like in the case of that 5-year-old girl, allegedly continually raped her. We're taking nude photos. We're just exploiting these children in multiple, and that's just one case of those 3 children in that one facility. There's multiple facilities across various states, but Texas, of course, we had the most heinous crimes that you can imagine. And then they don't want to hold them accountable. The DOJ actually, under the Trump administration, get that, dropped that lawsuit against the DOJ. They removed all of the children out of the custody of Southwest Key, and then they said, well, we'll just review your grants. But now employees a few weekends ago that were previously furloughed for Southwest Key because of all of these allegations are now being called back to work. So they must still be getting money and funding even under the Trump administration. And so that furthers the reasoning as to why we need to make sure that we as a state are doing everything that we can to hold these facilities accountable, to hold these NGO facilities accountable. And that's what HB 3120 does. And it creates a mechanism as to which we could do that. So it's on the way to the governor's desk now.
Hopefully he does sign it and it becomes law, because we need protecting our children, all the children that come into Texas. We have to protect them, period. And it's horrible that it's coming out there, but these stories have resonated for a long time. They go through. I want you to explain to everybody about the NGOs, how they do it, and the non-for-profits as well as the profitable ones. What are the main comments? Because how are they getting their hands on these children if they're supposed to go to a federal school, or you know what I'm saying? Kind of like what's going on? Why are they being allowed to go out to these areas or
Right.
to these?
Yeah. So what happens is these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, they are contracted with HHS and ORR. So they're like a third-party contractor. That are taxpayer funded. They say that they're non-governmental organizations, yet without taxpayer dollars, they would cease to exist. Many of them, most of them. And so what ends up happening is, let's just say an unaccompanied minor comes across the border. Border Patrol will apprehend them and document them. They want to get them out of Border Patrol because of the Flora Settlement Agreement as fast as possible out of their custody and bring them into HHS custody because they want to make it I forget the exact terminology, but a situation that is less confining for children, for minors. And a minor, when we say a minor, I have seen everything from infants, itty bitty newborn babies, to all the way up to right before 18. So that's a wide range. And there's a huge difference too, I will point out, right? Between a young child and an older teen. And there have been several instances of adults taking advantage of the unaccompanied minor program. They present themselves of unaccompanied minors and they end up being very much involved in gangs, and they end up being adults that later on commit they're actually adults. It's found out that they're actually adults posing as children. So there's a lot of problems. All that to say, there's a lot of problems with the program. But then once Border Patrol gives them to one of these facilities, it's usually one of these NGO facilities, and they will temporarily house them in one of these facilities until, and oftentimes they will also do the vetting of the sponsors on behalf of HHS as a third-party contractor before they are released to their sponsor, wherever that sponsor may be. So it's in our bill in particular as a state, we can only address that one portion of it, which is those facilities, those temporary housing facilities that are all over Texas. And that's what our bill aims to try to address, is that abuse that's occurring in those facilities.
Here's a question, because you said a number of 900,000, and how many?
900,000 since 2015. Over 900,000 have been released to sponsors in Texas.
How many of those are missing that they're no longer, they can't find? How many? Do we have a number?
So out of that 900,000 since 2015, no, and let me tell you why. Because those numbers that you hear through the media about, like the 300,000 under the Biden administration that they lost contact with, what they mean, no, that's including all of the number of children. There was I can't remember off the top of my head, but well over 1 million children under the Biden administration that had crossed over. So that number is all encompassing. And then out of that, a number of those children could have aged out. A lot of the times those children end up, they go to their sponsors, but then they end up going to somebody else. And so when they do try to follow up, or they make that phone call, they're not obligated, they being the sponsors, and this is one of the main problems, they're not obligated to answer the phone call after that child's been released. Once that child has been released, because of regulations and interpretations from Flora Settlement and others, HHS no longer has any custody or control. So a sponsor could literally answer the phone and say, "Don't call me ever again," click, and doesn't, and there's, by their own regulations, by their own standards, they can't do anything else to follow up. And then out of that, there was about 80,000. I can't, again, forgive me for not knowing the number off the top of my head. I have a lot of numbers in my head right now. It was like over 80,000 of that 300,000 that they couldn't get in contact with, that never even showed up to their immigration court hearings. And that's another major concern, because that's could be occurring for a number of reasons. Either the sponsor or their trafficker could be holding them, their documents, essentially hostage, or could have been telling them that, if you go, then I'll make sure if you don't have sex with X amount of men every single night and bring home an X amount of dollars, then I won't take you to the immigration hearing, and you could be deported. Like, there's a number of different scenarios, and that's why it is so important that these children do show up. And that is one thing that the Trump administration so far has been trying to address, with changes in the way that they are doing things, to make sure that these children, in fact, are hopefully showing up to their immigration hearings, and trying to hold the sponsors accountable for them not showing up.
Now, here's a question here. If they're being moved to these sponsors here, does a sponsor have the legalities to be, in other words, have to go to the sheriff's office and say, "You know what, I have so-and-so, how 2-3 kids here that are with me, sponsorships, and this is what is there like some type of or that can be done?"
So that is a fantastic question. And and thank you for asking that, because this actually gives me an opportunity to talk about something that I never really get into the weeds about. When I say that the unaccompanied minors, or that these migrant children, are even more vulnerable, this is one of the reasons why. And I know that you didn't intend on this, but we're going to go down this rabbit hole. One of the reasons why is, number one, there's a good percentage of these children that are going to people who are not their parents. They're level 2 or level 3 sponsors, meaning that they could be the child's brother, sister, aunt, uncle, tia, tío, extended family. Level 3 is extended family, which could be anybody, a cousin of a cousin of a cousin, right? Or it could be somebody completely unrelated. Why is that important? You have children, I have children. If I do something, if my child, now my daughter is homeschooled, my son went through public school. Let's say my son, for example, going to public school, he's registered, right? He doesn't show up to school. What happens? All of a sudden, after X amount of days, if he doesn't show up to school, I get a That's truancy,
Sure.
right? And they're saying you're endangering this child because where's the child? The child's not in school. Where's the child? You're endangering this child. Okay. And I would argue, some would argue, and rightfully so, right? To make sure this child is okay. Um, with the unaccompanied minors, then I could be held liable because that is my child, right? So legally, I'm held liable. However, let's say my daughter's friend comes over, right? And she ends up staying at my house for a week. And let's say that for whatever reason, she doesn't go to school. I don't force her to go to school because she's not my child. She's just visiting, right? And somebody tips off the police and says, "Hey, where is, so and so? She hasn't shown up to school and we've heard that she's here, in your house." They can come in or whatever and look, but can I be held liable? No. Let me tell you why. As long as the child's not being abused, the child has food, clothes, all their basic necessities. I'm not harming this child. Is it my legal responsibility? Of course not. Why? Because I'm not that parent's legal guardian. Okay. Let me explain that to you. If I'm a foster parent, I have to go through this whole process, or even an adoptive parent, through this whole process. And I am saying to the state, I am now this child's legal guardian. That means this child going to school is now my legal responsibility. This child, everything else that comes with that, being a caregiver and a guardian, is now my legal responsibility. That's different than these sponsors. These sponsors don't have that same legal responsibility. Are you hearing what I'm saying? So when they come, so if these authorities come and they say, well, but you are supposed to be the sponsor, such and such, because it's a federal level, it's a sponsor, but I'm not their legal guardian. I didn't go. That's why the vetting process is also so much more relaxed, because they're not their legal guardian. And that then creates this whole other loophole as to why it is so much. That's why when if the authorities come, because I have signed up to become a sponsor of Miguel, right? But the sheriff shows up and he says, "Where's Miguel?" And I'm like, "I don't know. He ran away, or I don't know. He left. He said he went to go, he went to go stay with so and so, with his other uncle. And I don't know where he is. I have no information." What are they going to do? Absolutely nothing. Why? I'm not his legal guardian. Does that make sense? And that's why these children are even more vulnerable.
So that's something that right there has to be changed. And that right there has to be changed for them to become a legal guardian. That has to be number one. I don't know how come they haven't done it. I don't know if it's not done by purpose, because, or is it not done because of what? Because right now,
part of the reason, yeah, let me tell you the part of the reason as to why. Because the other part of this problem is that good percentage, most of these sponsors, whether they be family, a parents or family, or a distant relative, or somebody unrelated, themselves are here in the country illegally. So a lot of these, and so that's also what makes it so difficult to be able to verify who they are. And then that's why they can't go through the legal process.
See that right there. Because if there is people that are here, that's a no-no. Now, if you're here illegally and you end up becoming a sponsor for 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, you have to have some. They're using the laws against us, that we have to protect them through the Constitution, granted so, right? If you're visiting the United States, or if I visit Mexico, by their laws and so on and so forth, as long as I'm there legally. But now, if a lot of these people are here illegally and they're releasing children to people legally, that's a fault in the system right there. That's the reason we have the problems that we have. And, we can't go much further, but right now I believe that we have some people up in in Homeland Security and everybody else, I would like to see that, to see if they can change that, because it needs to happen now more than ever. And let's say the sponsor's illegally here, but he ends up with 2, 3 kids that are his cousins, or maybe his sisters or something. Now he has to have a legal right to take care of them. Now he becomes their legal guardian. It has to occur, but there has to be something else. I mean, what you're telling me here, that means this thing's going to continue going forever. If that right
Correct.
there is not, if that right there is not fixed.
Correct. And
And
that's why I have stated even in my congressional testimony that so long as and that's how you see because oftentimes too the unaccompanied minors are able to obtain their residency faster and quicker than adults are. So that's also why they try to exploit that system, and that's even why sometimes families will send their child because they are aware of this, that their father is likely to be deported. They're a little bit easier to get through the immigration system to get their residency or their authorization to be here, and then once that happens, that's where that chain migration happens. So that's what I'm saying, that when we talk about using children, so long as the federal government continues to allow the use of children to bifurcate or go around the immigration loopholes that exist, this will continue to happen, and Texas will continue to be at the forefront. What we deal with our legislation and on the state level is one of the many issues to this very complex, problem. But it's what we can do legally and constitutionally to address it, because at least I know people, and this goes, to the other side of the argument. Well, that these children shouldn't be coming. They're coming, and until the federal government stops it, when they get here, let's push aside our beliefs of, oh well, but then they should be deported and everything else. We're not even having that conversation. So long as the federal government continues to allow and incentivize the use of children to go around our immigration system and loopholes, when they are here, while they are here, just like every other child, they deserve to be protected. We can't control what is happening to them. And when these kids, girls, like all the ones that I talked to and documented that are viciously raped and abused along their journey, but when they are here, we need to do what we can that they are to ensure that they're not going to be further abused and exploited using our taxpayer dollars in these facilities in our backyards. And that's my position. So that's what I seeked out to do.
thank you for doing that. If you need any help in whatever form or fashion, we're here to help, because that is a noble thing to do, and we need to do that. I think the next time you come down here to Laredo, I think we have to set up a meeting with some officials, maybe the DA, some other officials that are around here, the sheriff, and everybody, kind of do a think tank to see how we can bypass this situation, especially here in the border.
Well, what I would love to see is, and really this is like federal level, which to me is so much more difficult to try to get through because it's so much more complex. But really, going back to what we just talked about with all the complexities, if nothing else, we need to find a way to make it where, and maybe this is also something, and I know I've racked my brain around it, where even on the state level, is there something that we could do, since so many of these kids are in fact released to sponsors here in Texas, where if you are going and you're coming up and you're presenting yourself as a sponsor of one of these unaccompanied minors, I believe, regardless of your immigration status, that you need to be vetted and background checked. And I understand the arguments from the open border crowds. That's what they try to do. Oh, but they're not here legally. They're not able to present their documentation. Okay, that's no excuse. If they cannot verify who they say they are, and if we cannot effectively, just like any foster care parent, any adoptive parent, actually go through that vetting process to do our due diligence to protect this vulnerable child, then don't apply. then don't send your children here. I mean, it's that simple in my mind. I wish it was that simple in reality, but it's not, because the open border crowds will continue to say, you know they'll continue to use these talking points, and it's nonsense, and in my opinion, they don't really care about these children, because they know that it opens these children up to exploitation, and they just disappear. They end up in motels, they end up in basements, they end up in all these different types of situations, and factories, so many of them in factories, 10 years old and such. They don't care. They know what the problem is, but they don't care because it goes against their George Soros funded agendas.
Well,
So,
it seems like we understand what the problem is, and you just said it. They don't care, and we just good people have to stand up, and now it's a time to stand up. And enough of this. I don't, and people making money on I don't care. We need to stop that. It's sickening. Period. It's sickening.
it
I don't know
is.
what else we can do. But whatever you need, whatever, we'll be behind you because you've been doing an excellent job. I've seen you for several years, almost a decade.
Yeah, it's been a long time. It feels like it's just been like never ending at this point. But I'm glad that our bill made it across the finish line, across party lines. Everybody saw. I cannot tell you how many people said when we brought this legislation, finally, a lot of it, another reason why it took so long is, and I'll tell you, actually, let me tell you, one of the reasons why it took so long is, number one, education. It took a lot of years to educate members and legislators and their staffers on what the problem was and what we could do to try to address it, what we were trying to do with this legislation. But even as we got down to the wire, there was many of these NGOs that actually came out in opposition last session and during the special sessions. But particularly this session, they knew that it was common sense. They knew that we had overwhelming support across party lines because it was common sense legislation that so many legislators and their staffers said, how is this not law already? Um, and so there was this one um, Republican lobbyists that tried to quietly kill our legislation, claiming to be speaking on behalf of the Trump administration, which was a bold-faced lie, stating that our legislation was going to harm the administration's efforts, immigration efforts and border security efforts, which was a bold-faced lie. Until, of course, people within the agencies, our contacts that we reached out to, actually verified, no, in fact, this legislation actually would help the federal agencies and the Trump administration, because it is the states where these facilities are operating, and it'll actually help us make sure that these third party contractors, these NGOs, are doing what they claim to be doing and are adhering to not just HHS guidelines, but also those background checks, because that's one of the things, is that for so many years, we wrote a research paper on it. So many of these facilities weren't even adhering to HHS guidelines. And so we wrote a paper about all of the longstanding problems and issues, their failures to conduct proper background checks, and that mysteriously, whenever finally a case, an allegation of abuse by a child was brought up to the proper law enforcement authorities, by the time they showed up to these facilities, the employee was no longer there, just mysteriously. I mean, crap like that, that's been happening. And so it was a Republican taxpayer funded lobbyist that tried to quietly kill our bill. But thankfully, Representative Stan Kitzman and Senator Joan Huffman, and several others, they were bold. They knew that this was wrong. They knew that this was an issue, and that it needed to get across the finish line. And we're actually quite disgusted by the lies that this lobbyist spread, and his efforts in trying to kill our legislation. So I am thankful when legislators are willing to be brave and willing to stand up and say no. I know that, these lobbyists oftentimes pretend to be far more powerful than they are. But we do have good people still in the legislature that are trying to do the right thing. And I'm so grateful and thankful that they were bold and courageous, and we were able to get across the finish line. And hopefully, God willing, Governor Abbott will be signing it soon into law.
Well, thank you for your work, and thank everybody that stood tall. But you said one major thing there. It's called common sense laws, and I think we have to come back to our basics. Common sense. Enough of the dreams and not living in the same reality and not seeing things as it is. It's common sense. Children are across the aisles, whether it's Republican or Democrat or what have you, and we have to protect all children. Period. And if one cannot see that, remember, it saddens me. But we have good people inside office. There's still hope, and I know that your work should resonate, and we should start changing at least the perception of these sponsors that are going to start getting vetted, and maybe we can continue going through that, because that loophole right there needs to stop, and hopefully somebody can hear about that. But thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you for the work, and keep on doing what you're doing. I know it's hard, and whatever we can do.
Yeah, no, and I want to give some kudos to Representative Richard Raymond. He was one of those who, I mean, even during the last session, not just this session, but last session, particular, he's one of those courageous that we may not always agree on things on these issues, but on the issues like this that really truly matter and have real world impact for real people and real children, he's bold. And he would give, some of these NGOs a run for their money, and hold them accountable. And so I really greatly appreciate him. I know I had a great conversation with Representative Raymond, and he reminds me of my tios, so that helps too. But he's, like I said, we may not always agree on a lot of the issues, but I sure do respect him and have great admiration for him, and I appreciate his willingness to support our legislation and vote for our legislation.
He's a good man, stand-up man. Those are the type of people that we need inside, and we have something.
100%.
Absolutely. Well, folks, you heard from Sheena Rodriguez, and let's try to see what we can do out in our own communities to see if we can change these things. Once more, I want to thank you. And folks out there, your website is where can they get more information if they want to help you and get in touch with you?
Yeah. Our website is securetheborder.us. And if you go there, you can it'll also link you to our social media. But the website is securetheborder.us, and people can always send me an email through there as well, and I'll get it. So,
absolutely. Folks, you all stay safe, be safe, and God bless you. Until next time.
Thank you.
So when I was working on Selena, the series for Netflix, to play the role of Abraham Quintanilla, I put on a specific amount of weight, which I was fine doing, but also realizing it could be difficult to get that weight off. I got back into my physical regimen with James Leha, but I was still having trouble with just those last amounts. And that's when I got to meet Arturo from Laredo Medical Weight Loss Clinic. And just the products that he gave me kind of put me over the edge. I feel great about myself.